Okay, so I am going to talk about shading in this video. You're going to need to have a drawing pencil. You can have different variations. This one happens to be a 2B, but 6B, 4B, even an HB pencil will work. Now, I also have my photograph next to me, and I have the start or the image that I traced on over here. I have a video on graphite transfers, so if you wanted to watch that, you can. You should watch that before you watch this video, especially if you're in my class. Now, next thing we're going to do is I'm going to start off by doing two values. So the one value will be the white of the paper, and then the other value is going to consist of all of, you can think of them as my dark halftones. So I'm going to just lay in value in all of those darker spaces to start. Now, I'm not going to discern between darker and lighter. However, if I have an area like this nose right here where I kind of covered up my lines, I am going to darken those slightly so that I don't lose them. Not quite ready to hide those contour lines. So anywhere that there is a value change, or darker value, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and just layer this in. Starting with two values. You can see how tight my lines are. I don't see any gaps of the paper through it. And in some cases, it's even difficult to tell which direction I'm shading in. That's ideal. You don't want to see any lines in there at this moment. Should just be nice, solid graphite shading. I am checking on my photograph to make sure that I am following what I'm seeing. One thing you will notice about the nose is that there is really dark value in there, and then this kind of stretches underneath and over here. I'm just going to make sure that I put in that one value for now. I've got a little bit of shadow up in here. I'm going to put some shadow in the actual eyebrow. Once again, hair comes last. So you are not going to do any of that hair texture for now. You're just going to put in the shade for now. Now I could go along this line right here since there is a little bit of value right in there. But then I can also leave that for later too. There is a slightly darker value in the top lip here. And I'm going to go ahead and lay that in. Anywhere where I'm seeing shadow, just want to put that in there. In here, obviously the pupil is darker, but at this stage, I'm not going to worry about darkening the pupil. I'm just going to make sure I fill it all in with value. We'll get to the point where we darken that pupil later. You can start to see a little more life coming out of the drawing once you start putting value into it. Oh, I missed a spot over here. That happens sometimes with tracing. Hopefully it's in the right spot. I'll pause for just a moment. All right, so as I'm going to make sure that I am getting every little area with shading that needs it. If I didn't draw it in the first place, so if you didn't go in and draw shadows like this, for example, you're going to be finding that it's going to be really difficult to figure out where that shadow is. So over here, I actually did forget to draw in some of the shadows for the hair. And so I'm having to make it up, like copy it as I go along. And, you know, if I make a mistake, I'm going to have to do a little more erasing than if I had drawn this on the original sketch in the first place. So once you get to a point where you've gotten all of your dark values in the face, your dark halftones in the face, then you can start going through and filling in your dark halftones in the hair. Once again, if you didn't draw in those shadowy areas in your hair, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of, let me zoom out again. You're going to have to do a little bit of kind of guessing where everything is, or maybe even some erasures, which since we're doing very medium pressure of shading right now, erasure shouldn't be too big of a deal. But you should be drawing lightly. Don't press down too hard at this stage. We are going to layer these and make them darker eventually. Now I am putting in the darker tones in the hair, the darker halftones in the hair, which includes this mess of whatever that is up there. And I just want to remind you that I have quite a bit of experience. So, you know, since you're all new to this, give yourself a little bit of a break. If you're finding you have to erase or you have to plan a little bit more, then you're probably going to need to make sure that you get that sanding done properly. Sorry, sanding. I got distracted, not sanding. Get the shading done properly by erasing and practicing with that sort of thing. Let me get this shaded in here. So I'm going to continue to find all of the dark halftones in the hair and lay those in. And then I will press play again on the video and we'll talk about more stuff. Whoops. So when you're working on the hair, it's something that I wanted to make sure I noted before I went any further. You're not going to be putting this same value in your really light areas of the hair. So if you have very blonde hair and the light is really bright on it, and you've got these nice bright white sections in here, you don't want to put any of this value in here. I'm purposefully focusing on the darker areas, although technically I could put a lot of value in initially. I just think it'll be easier to get more layers if I slowly layer it rather than put in, you know, one full layer over everything to begin with for the hair. So I just wanted to point that out, and then I'll keep going. All right, so now I'm at the stage where I can start to really hone in on those really dark areas and give those a little bit more value. So, and depth. So when I look at mine, for example, the nose is fairly dark over here, and this could use a lot more value, so that when I go in to create this darker value right in here, that I have enough wiggle room and I can actually see my value transition. So I'm going to go ahead and start looking for those darker areas. Now, sometimes you get a little problem where you push down really hard on the paper and your graphite just kind of wants to sit in there. That will happen occasionally. You'll just have to be patient with it if that is a problem. You follow the direction of that line and you can usually eliminate it. So I had this little space right here. It was looking white even though I was drawing over it. That's because there's a groove in the paper. I am going to have to be a little bit more careful in shading that spot, as it's going to start to collect the pencil, the graphite in it. So right now I'm just kind of adding in my really dark areas. So I'm going to have some really dark areas on the face here, especially in the this shadow right here, going over the lips, going under the lips, going between the two lips, so in the middle. And you can see just this little amount that I've started adding does make a world of difference. And the more that I layer on here, the more you can start to see the form. It looked very flat when you transferred it on here. And now, with a little bit of value added, it's starting to have more dimension to it. It's starting to look three-dimensional. And sometimes some of those initial sketches, you start to see problems that you had and you couldn't really figure out why it looked a certain way. And now you can see, okay, so this area looks right now because when I put value in there, it looks like it's the right size. So that's something that's really hard for a newbie to get over, is trusting the measurements when you're doing that comparative measurement. But when you start to shade, you start to see why it's important to trust those measurements. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep shading this. You can really start to see that value shaping the form of the face. And you can see how I'm still being very careful. I'm not pushing down hard. The layer of graphite that you put on there, each layer is going to darken it. Just like when we did our value scales. And you can see too that I'm working by value, getting those dark values in there. I'm not going to just finish the nose. That would be a terrible idea, because if I just work on the nose, then what I'll end up with is I'll have to fix the value in the nose. Whereas if I work all around the face, what I end up with is the right values in the right places. And I won't have to do much correcting. This part's a little hard to see because there's that line drawn in there. If you need a new photograph, you can always ask me to print you a new one, or you can print a new one out yourself. It looks like there's actually like a little wrinkle right there that I didn't see. And Really look for those dark value changes. Start to focus on getting form into the face. And remember, form is 3D. So that's what we're working towards, is 3D. So I'm going to continue to shade, working only on those dark values, really getting the dark halftones drawn in, so that when I'm ready to start working on the halftones and the rest of the face, I'll have plenty of space to work through. All right, so while I'm working on this, I want to also be making sure that I'm checking and seeing if everything kind of looks right. And one thing I'm noticing is that this needs to kind of come out just a little bit more to fit that space right there. And I can start filling in some of my halftones at this point. So with this, once I've got all of my dark tones in place, it should be fairly easy to start kind of seeing where all of my lighter or my halftones are. Those ones are usually the easiest to see, but they're the hardest to replicate. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start looking for like the little bit darker halftones in there. So like under the eyebrow right here. And once again, I want to reiterate that I'm not focusing on trying to like finish an eye. I'm focusing on trying to get the values in. One of the biggest mistakes I see newbies doing is going, oh, I'm going to finish this eye because that's my favorite part and it looks beautiful. And I want that part to really look good. And, you know, it will look good if you spread out around your image and make sure that you are filling in all of your value all over. That you're not just focusing on that eyeball, because it will end up looking like you focused on the eye if you just focus on the eye. So here in this nose area here, this is where it's going to start to really matter if I put the right values in place. So I'm seeing right now that this is probably going to have to be darker in the top lip here, so that when I add in value here, I'll be able to see the difference in the value there and see how I'm just kind of focusing in on my value changes, focusing on trying to get the right shapes in there. Remember from the features videos, the features practice videos that we did, that noses are made up of different planes. And then we have to be careful too, because they don't have a whole lot of contour lines on them or edges to their shadows there. So when we add in value to something like a nose, we've got to make sure that we're kind of being aware of those planes. So you can see there's a plane right here, and I need to fill that in with some value. You can see too that there's quite a bit of shadow right here, but I don't want to lose this line here. So if I start shading and this line starts to disappear, I'm going to maybe darken that area there. So just kind of focusing on the general shape. I can see that there's like a ball right here. So if I start shading that, and you can see how it's starting to have a little bit more dimension to it. There's a line in the middle of the nose, so I'm going to go ahead and erase that. There's a highlight right in the middle of my nose, right on the side of my nose here. So that's something that if I don't put enough value in, you're not going to be able to see that highlight. So I'm going to just keep working on putting in values, halftones, all throughout the face. You can see too that this is a highlight right here, highlight here, highlight here, no highlight over here. So this whole area has to be shaded in. Make sure not to fall into that trap of like trying to shade quickly and getting all those little itty bitty lines all over your work. And if you do have, you do need a little bit of help with blending, you can definitely use a paper towel that you wrap around your finger like so and go through and just kind of blend. Now, you should not be putting a lot of pressure on when you're blending with a paper towel. If you have to push down hard, then you don't have enough graphite. It should be a very light, even pressure. See how that quickly turned into, a lot of shading. If you put too much pressure, you have a tendency to kind of lose your values. So be careful with that. Right here, I put a little too much pressure and I smoothed out a large area that I didn't quite need to be that smooth. So you can see I'm having to put back a little bit more value. But once again, I need to make sure that I am working through this image, focusing on the entire thing, not just in one spot. Because I want to make sure that everything looks like it's the right value. Even want to go into the hair and start putting some halftones in the hair as well. And in my hair, there's not a whole lot of highlights. So I can definitely add a lot of halftone in here. Now, another thing when I'm blending that you might notice is that I am going with the shape or with the lines, the contour lines on there. So remember, you need to make sure too that you're aware of those contour lines, where they exist, all that stuff. Don't cross the contour lines, go with them when you're shading. Make a mistake, you can lift it up, keep going. So I'm just going to keep shading, and I will come back when I've got almost all of my halftones in place, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of working in some of those details, or finishing up those values and then eventually working in details. All right. So something that always has bothered me about that a lot of newbies tend to do when it comes to creating portraits is they have a tendency to get the mouth not done correctly. And what they tend to do is they go, okay, so I know that lips are a different color than skin. So what they'll do is they'll like draw a line around the lips and they'll fill them in and make them darker. But if you look at my photograph, there is no discernible line right here. This is all going to be the same, pretty much the same value in here. So I want to make sure that when I am shading this, that I don't decide, oh, because lips are a different color, I need to put a different value. Value and color are two separate elements of art. Don't try to put them in the same box. Color can have value, but it doesn't really, it's not the same thing as value. Value is separate from color. So when I am adding in the values, I'm just looking at what's in that picture there, and I am mimicking what I'm seeing. That could mean that I have more value in spots, and it could mean that I have less value in spots. But whatever the case, I've got a fingerprint on here. Whatever the case, I need to make sure that I am being very careful of just trying to put in value that doesn't exist in there. Now, another thing is when you're doing things like lips, to make sure that you're looking very carefully at all of those little itty bitty values in there, because they can impact the form of the lips. Another thing to keep in mind is your whites of your eyes. So mine have not had any value added to them yet, and they look like they're jetting out. So what I need to do is I need to push them back into the head a little bit. First off, I need the eyelashes and eyelid to look like it's over top of it. So there's going to be a little bit more shadow in there, right underneath the eyelid. And then you're also going to see, because the eyeball is curved, you're going to see a little bit of shadow in the curves of the eye as well, the whites of the eye. And you can see already, this one looks so much more like the photograph. It doesn't look like it's jetting out of the face like this one is. Just need to make sure that I set it back in the head a little bit by just putting a little bit more value into the whites of the eye. And you really can see how I've really moved all around the face. I haven't been focusing on one area in particular. Everything has value in it. I'm still not really at the point where I'm done. I'm noticing that there needs to be a little bit more value change in some of these little spots here. I don't know if you can necessarily see it in the video, but this is slightly darker here and here. And I am starting to get to that point in my drawing, but there's still a few things that could use some adjustments. Some lines that need to be maybe faded out a little bit more. I need to make some changes a little bit to the shapes of things, especially down on these lips. And I need to go darker with some of my values. Now that I've got a lot of value on here, it's going to be important to kind of crisp up some of those darker spots so that we still maintain depth in the image. So keep going with your drawings. Don't forget about the hair. Keep adding in value in the hair. Remember to layer too. So when I'm adding more value into the hair, I'll layer on top of the value that's already there, and it'll give me automatically a darker value in that spot. If your hair is starting to blend in with your face, that means that you probably don't have enough value somewhere. And just kind of crisp it up with a little bit more value. Darken it in spots. As I'm working, I'm also noticing here and there, a few spots, that there needs to be some adjustments. Like I am noticing a little bit that this mouth looks like it might have been a little too low to start. And that is something that could use a little bit of adjustment. I may have to erase some things and move things at this point to get it in the right spot, which is why it's so important that you do that first preliminary sketch well, and you check and double check, because you don't want to have to, at this stage, fix something that big in your drawing. So this is something that I'm looking at it and I am noticing, and I'm going to make a decision whether or not I can adjust it. But in the meantime, I've got a lot of the hair to cover, and I've got details and stuff to add in later. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, but I do still need to keep going. There will be another video that'll talk a little bit more about texture and maybe getting some more dark values in there, and all those forms. So thank you for watching, and I hope that you learned something.